This is the Oklahoma Talking Company.
Wiles goes wild in Peoria. Hancock takes the win. And is reality TV really reality? All this and more on this week's Powersports Podcast. Hey everybody, and welcome to the Powersports Podcast. I am Jason Baffrey, and I am joined today by my good friend Eric Colvin of Colvin Motorcycle Company.
Good to be here, guys. And
we have a special guest in studio, our second official in-studio guest. We are joined by Don Muma of Motive Cycle Works.
Thank you very much.
We're going to get into some lengthy conversation with Don on some great topics here in just a little bit, but of course, there was some great racing that went on over the weekend, and Don, feel free to jump in here anytime if you feel like it. But if you've listened to any of our previous episodes, we are big fans of the Speedway Grand Prix, and this past weekend was the Swedish Speedway Grand Prix. And Sweden just happens to be the adopted home of American three-time champion Greg Hancock. His wife is Swedish, and he lives over there during the Speedway Grand Prix season. So it was essentially his home race over the weekend. And Greg was able to take the win of the event in, I believe they said this was the 36th time he's raced in Sweden, and this is the first time that he's been able to win a race there. And he extends his points lead in the Speedway Grand Prix point standings by 12 points. He now has a 12-point lead over Ty Woffenden. And just a great weekend for Greg Hancock. And he's been riding just so great this entire season, but has yet to pick up his first event win. But now he has it, and he extends his points lead.
Those guys were serious, were they not? They were running each other into the wall. They were some aggressive riding out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And the final, he was behind for most of the way, and just made a really great move to take the lead on the last lap and get the win, and you couldn't have asked for a better ride from Greg Hancock, and just so cool to see.
That was the entire event was packed with excitement.
Well, it's really nice because it's quick. There's not a lot of waiting around. It's quick and it's exciting, and it just keeps moving.
Yeah, this is true. Speedway, as far as entertainment goes, it's 4 laps, and it's handlebar to handlebar for 4 laps. And a lot of the races that we saw, there was a lot of lead changes and a lot of close riding and a lot of rubbing. And
there's a lot of rubbing. I mean, for being on motorcycles, that is close.
That's a lot of touching for riding.
Yes, it's not like NASCAR, where you got 4 wheels on the ground and you got 2 wheels on the ground. And then a lot of times they didn't even have 2 on the ground.
This is true. You got somebody sideways with a wheel in there, and somebody's trying to get up underneath him, and the guy has got the bike stood up, crossed up in a power slide, but a broad slide, and he's leaning on the guy that's underneath him. I mean, those guys was serious in Sweden.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see if Hancock can hold on to this points lead, which he's had for several events now. And at 46 years old, he is the grandfather of the sport almost. And
you gotta love that.
We're the same age, and I look at him and I just wish that I ate better, took better care of myself. But on the flip side of that, I told my wife, I said, Greg Hancock is still winning races and racing these bikes at 46. So it's not too late for me to get started.
Yeah, absolutely. Use him as the example. Talk your wife into it.
I use everything that I can. So in other racing action this weekend, we talked in last week's show about the Peoria TT, and you talked extensively about riding the track at Peoria. But one guy who seems to know how to ride that track better than anybody else around is Henry Wiles, and that's a name that we haven't talked a lot about this year for AMA flat track racing. But Henry Wiles gets the win in the GNC1 category over Jared Meese, and he wins 12 in a row. 12 times in a row he has won the Peoria TT. I believe he has it mastered now.
Yeah, he's going to be the Chris Carr. He's going to be the new Prince of Peoria. Is what's going to happen.
Well, I think by 12 wins in a row. What is Carr's record?
Carr is, I had to double check because it's been a while since I kept up with Carr and since I rode, in the Pro Series itself, but more than 12, but okay. Not a whole lot. Yeah. Wiles is somewhere right there. As young as he is and as good as he is, he's going to be the new Prince of Peoria.
Yeah. Well, it's just a great win for him, and he's a guy that like I said, we don't talk about him a lot because he runs mid-pack a lot on the flat tracks, on the miles and the half miles and everything. But man, there's just something about Peoria that he has dialed in.
It's got to be some kind of I'm not sure about his background, but his style of riding at Peoria is a off-road style that a lot of the other guys don't use that same style, whatever he is doing at Peoria is on right now.
Yeah.
Nobody can beat him right now.
Yeah, in the GNC2 category, it was Hayden Gillum who took the win, and that was a really exciting race. I mean, probably one of the most exciting races of the season for AMA Pro Flat Track Racing, and that's his first AMA Pro Flat Track win in the GNC2 series, and he's a road racer. He races in the Moto America series. So he was crossing over there and scoring your first win and doing it at Peoria with a right turn and a jump. That makes it even more exciting. Well,
there you go with the dirt track influence on the road racers. Dirt track has always been a big help to the guys road racing. Go back and look at Roberts, for instance, was really influential with him, and then look at the riding style that is now the riding style of all road racers, and that originated with Kenny Roberts.
Yeah, and we see more and more, and we've talked about it before, you can see MotoGP riders, Valentino Rossi, Marc Marquez, a lot of those guys are practicing by going flat track racing, and Rossi even has his ranch where he has flat track set up, and he does training for himself and then trains younger riders that he's helping along. And they have DTX bikes, and they go out there and they slide those things around to get the feel of the bike and have some fun. And it's just a really cool deal. But we don't realize how much flat track influences the riding going on in Europe and around the world.
Yeah, and if you look at a lot of the slow-mo of the MotoGP riders, if you can get a hold of some of those anywhere, watch it and watch it closely, because they slide the motorcycles now more than I've ever seen them slide motorcycles in the past.
There's a lot of times that back tire is almost spinning twice as fast as the front.
Yeah.
If you watch that slow motions of the GP.
Yeah, and they drift the bike a lot more now than I've ever seen in the past.
So other racing that went on this weekend was, of course, the Lucas Oil Pro Motocross Series, and anybody want to take a guess on who won?
Roczen.
You guessed it. Ken Roczen, once again with a dominant performance, goes 1-1. And Cooper Webb also had another great day and took the overall win in the 250 category. So it's looking like Roczen's probably going to lock this thing up here pretty soon.
Roczen is going to be like DeCoster was back in the day at Suzuki, you know it?
Yeah, very possible. Now, I think that, once Dungey comes back from injury, I mean, we'll see him back when the Supercross season starts. We'll probably see him before that at the Monster Energy Cup, I would imagine, if not the Red Bull Straight Rhythm event that comes out. Since he's a Red Bull rider, we'll probably see him there as well. But, that Dungey and Roczen battle is probably as good as anything in history. And if Roczen is going to Honda next year, and he's on a factory team, which he's on basically a support team now with the RCH Racing. They get some Suzuki help, but it's not the full factory effort like the Yoshimura Suzuki team. However, Honda, we know Honda has good bikes. We know that they've had a lot of success in the past. And if Roczen rides at the level that he's riding out now, which there's no reason that he shouldn't, barring injury, Roczen Dungey in Supercross and outdoor motocross in 2017 could be one for the ages.
Like the Rick Johnson and Jeff Ward deal.
Yeah. And I think, that's certainly great for the sport, and as fans, it's going to be exciting to watch. But, it's obviously good for for those guys. And I mean, they're both in incredibly great shape. They're mental about their riding, in their approach. They are skilled, and I think it'll just be great to see what happens next year.
You always have to like aggressive rivalries, do you not?
And, well, yes, you do. And I have to think that, I mean, Eli Tomac has now picked up a couple of outdoor wins. He seems to be, based on the interviews that I've read and seen, he's more comfortable with the Kawasaki. He's more comfortable with that team. So he could easily put himself in the – and we know he's fast. I mean, if you saw him on the Honda in 2015, especially those first few outdoor races – nobody could touch him. I mean, he was just a barn burner. So now that he's getting comfortable with the KX, and I'm excited about what's to come in Supercross and motocross for those guys.
I'm excited to the point to where when you either go to an event or you watch an event, it's like the late 70s or the early 80s where you had no idea. You just knew that there was 5 or 6 guys that were capable of winning, and it was anybody's guess as to who would come out on top.
And let me throw something else in the mix. You'll have Cooper Webb moving up to 450s with a factory Yamaha effort in 2017. And we know he's obviously fast and has a fire in him to win. So, I mean, just those 4 riders alone, if everybody stays healthy, it could mean a really amazing 2017 for Supercross, certainly, and hopefully that carries over into the motocross too. Like I said, if everybody can stay healthy, and that's the one caveat you always have with those particular series.
Yeah, as long as you can keep everybody healthy, it's going to be well worth watching. That's for sure.
Should be fun. Well, let's get to our guest, Don Muma, Motorcycle Works, here with us today. And what we want to talk about is something that I think you as a listener will find fairly interesting. If you're into cars and motorcycles, as we are, you've probably watched some of the reality TV shows that are on, and there are several of them that involve building motorcycles and building cars. And you can think back to the early shows, even with Jesse James and West Coast Choppers, and then you think about the biker build-off shows, and then you have the
Orange County Bunch,
Orange County Choppers, and you have Counts Customs or Counting Cars or whatever that one is, and then you have the guys out of Texas, and there's just so many that I can't.
Yeah, the Gas Monkey Garage.
Yeah, the Gas Monkey Garage guys, and you think about Overhauling when that was on, and
I think there was less drama in Overhauling than any of those.
Yeah, and even though they made up an entire story to fool the person whose car it was going to be, so which is funny now that you think about that. But there's something about those shows that they are a reality, and you can't see me, but I'm doing air quotes, reality TV, because there's really no such thing as reality TV unless it's maybe a documentary is almost reality, but the way reality TV works is it's mostly scripted, and they know exactly what they're going to do, and they compress time, and that's really what we want to get into. But when you watch these shows, they take a car or a motorcycle, and there's always a deadline, and we're always rushing, and we're always working 24 hours a day straight because we have to meet the deadline, and we have an impossible task, and then, of course, something goes wrong. Somebody messed up the paint job, or somebody,
ordered the wrong
wheels. They bent the crank as they were trying to put it in, or whatever it may be. So it creates this incredible drama that always happens. And as somebody that spent some time working in a body shop, and that's me, and you, Eric, have a motorcycle shop, and Don, you do custom motorcycles. We're not really looking at reality.
No, it distorts it, doesn't it?
It distorts it badly, greatly. One of the main things, especially when it comes to motorcycles, cars are a little bit better than motorcycles, but just getting parts. If you're going to use parts off the shelf, there's no place you can go that you can buy parts off the shelf. You've got a couple of places where you can go buy like little things, like maybe tires, depending on what you're riding, or
An exhaust system, possibly,
depending on what you're riding.
You
know, but if you're looking at something that's older, or you're looking at something that's a little bit more exotic, you're waiting. No matter what you do, you're waiting.
Yeah, and you have to buy a slot a lot of times.
Yeah.
And you had to wait until they actually make that, right?
Mm-hmm. And you're waiting on it, and then after it gets to you, a lot of times it doesn't fit right.
Oh, no, not at all. That would be too much to ask that it would fit when you bought it.
You know, it doesn't fit right. So then you're modifying it to fit right, and then after you get it modified to fit right, and you get it to fit right, now you've got to recoat it or rechrome it or replate it, whatever to make it look good, because you've cut on it, you've chopped on it, you've moved stuff, you've ground on it. You know, so the whole persona of what the television shows show how these guys build these bikes or cars and how long it takes versus the actual reality of how long it takes is vastly different.
Well, sure it is. What they say they can do in 40 hours in reality is probably 140 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. If you have all of your parts already and you know they fit, and they're on there already, and you had them all laid out, and you have all the bolts and all the hardware laid out where you knew where everything was.
This is after the fab work's done.
Yeah, and everything was there.
And after the tear down and after the rebuild. And
yeah, and you're just assembling, hey, you know, that all right, hey, we got this. Yeah, we can do it in 40 hours. I mean, just when we did that Sportster the other day, you know, people don't realize how much time it takes. We bought parts that were supposed to fit. We bought parts that were supposed to go in there. We had to wait for our parts to get here. The parts got here, and then if you look at our Instagram, you'll see when I clayed the piston, the valve was touching the piston.
Yeah, we had to do a lot of cylinder head work on that one.
Yeah, we had to do a lot of cylinder head work just to make it work. And these are parts that come out of the box that say, you're ready to go.
Or they bring you how many customers have you had that bring you a picture that they found somewhere, okay, either in media that they've printed or a magazine, and they say, I want this bike, and you say, okay, so you run up a bid for the bike, and then they want to get upset about the time frame because in the magazine or in the download they've said, oh, well, it took a fourth of the amount of time that you want to do in the reality of what it takes to make this bike that they like. They say, oh, well, I found, you know, information on this build and it was like, you know, half that long or only a fourth that long. How often do you run into that?
I run into that all the time. I run into it all the time where people bring me pictures and say, I want a bike like this. And then when I run into, they say they want a bike like this, and then when they find out how much it's going to cost, they're like, well, that's more than a new bike. And I'm like, yeah, you're getting a hand-built bike for you. I get that all the time. And then when they find out how long it'll take, they're like, well, I wanted to ride it, you know, in 2 weeks. I'm like, well, if you want to ride it in 2 weeks, you better come up with a lot more money than that, because I'll have to work around the clock and I'll have to get everything air freighted to me immediately. And, you know, and that's just the way it is, you know, and they have no idea of what it really takes, you know, and my shop constantly loses time from what I bill somebody to what it actually takes to do it. I'm constantly losing time. There's no way around it, because you can tune just a simple tune up on a bike, depending on what bike it is. We can use like a newer ZX10. We do a newer ZX10, not new enough that it's got fuel injection, but newer that it's a newer one, but it's still got carburation. If you tune it, you could spend an entire 2 days just tuning a bike, because of how many times you have to take an airbox off, how many times you have to take covers off, how many times you have to take a gas tank off to get to the carburetors, to change out the jets, and then put it back together, and then go run it again to see how it is on those jets, and then take it all back apart. You know, and you can't charge somebody 2 days worth of work for tuning a bike. I mean, I guess you could, but you're not going to have very many customers, because customers are not going to want to spend, $1,500 to have their bike tuned up.
Yeah, and, you know, a lot of dyno time. We sacrifice a lot of dyno time. Actually, you and I have sacrificed a lot of dyno time, even with injected bikes, especially when people pre-purchase items that are not really catered to the engine package and the performance package that they have. They've read a blog somewhere, something, and it says, oh, you need to have this, or you have this exhaust system, and it's not a good system, or this airbox mod, and it looks like a beaver with scurvy has attacked the thing.
Yeah. Oh, that happened not too long ago with the Moto Guzzi. We had that Moto Guzzi in there. He had that custom exhaust built for his bike. He had somebody else do it, and then he put the Power Commander 5 system on it. Power Commander 5 system is supposed to be really easy. You're supposed to just plug that in, and you'll be able to load up fuel maps, and you're ready to go. And then I think we spent close to 6 or 8 hours.
Yeah, to fix it.
To fix it. Yeah, on the dyno. 6 to 8 hours on the dyno time. Spinning it up, shutting it down. Spinning it up, shutting it down. Modifying this, modifying that on the fuel map. I basically, when that all ended up, I had basically written an entirely new fuel map once you and I were done with it. It was nothing like it was when it started out. And that was the fuel map. They said, yep, that's what you need.
Yeah, there's a lot of misconception that people download on the web or they read in blogs. How often do you deal with that with customers? A daily basis, weekly basis?
Probably at least weekly. And then their information they get from the blogs is sometimes so wrong, especially when I'm the one looking at the bike. I had a customer in there not too long ago who had a transmission problem in his R Series BMW, and it was making a rattling noise, and everybody on the blogs told him, oh, there's a spring that is on the input shaft inside the transmission, and that spring's probably broken, and so it lets stuff rattle around in there. So I took the bike, we took the transmission out, we broke the transmission down, and the output shaft bearing was completely destroyed in the transmission. So everything in the transmission was rattling around, and it had what looked like valve lapping compound in the transmission because there was so much metal just floating around in the fluid. And I told him this, I'm like, you need a transmission. And then he calls me back the next day and he says, well, I was on the blogs and I was talking to some of the guys and they said, no, I don't need a transmission. And I'm like, they did not even look at your transmission. They have no idea what's wrong with your transmission. I'm telling you, it looks like valve lapping compound in here. Everything in your transmission is ruined. And he's like, well, I thought maybe we could just put that bearing in it and put a new seal in it and clean it out and we'll be fine. I'm like, no. I'm like, I will do that, but you're signing a big old waiver that says you're doing this against
against your expertise and your recommendations.
Yeah, so when you drive away and it completely has catastrophic failure in less than 1,000 miles, you're not coming back to me and trying to blame me for it.
Right.
How many times do you have a customer come in? I get it a lot, and they've read somewhere that it should only take 45 minutes to do this, or it only takes an hour to do this, or there's several people that brag that they can do it in 20 minutes, and it's actually like a several-hour job to do it properly.
Yes, I get that. I get that a lot. I get a lot of people. I actually. The good thing about it though is I have a lot of customers now who strictly come back to me because I have got my little waiting room where you could wait if you want to, and you're basically out in the shop so you can see what's going on. And they will come back to me time and time again because when I change a tire, I'll change a tire. A tire change is only supposed to take depending on the bike, maybe 20 to 40 minutes, depending on the bike. But I'll pull the axle out. I'll make sure the axle is perfectly clean. I will go over and polish it if it needs to. When we're doing brakes, we pull out all the pins and we clean them all. We polish them all. We re-grease them. Most shops don't do that.
No, they don't. And a lot of times we get motorcycles in my shop where you literally have to beat the axles out of them. Nobody's put any anti-seize back on the axle or even a small amount of grease or anything when they put it back together.
Yeah, well, that's the whole thing with the dealerships. Why the dealerships only go back, depending on the dealership, 7 to 11 years. I don't know of any dealership that really works on anything over 11 years. Most of them are 7 to 11 years. And they always say it's because of tooling. Well, because the newer bikes don't use the same tooling and we've switched out the specialty tooling. And it's not true. The reason is because all that stuff gets seized up in those older bikes and it takes longer. So they lose time.
Yeah, and how many times have you pulled an axle out of a bike and the bearings are junk? The wheel hasn't been off of this motorcycle in a decade.
I've had a couple Harley Davidsons come in my shop that the actual tire itself was seized to the rim to the point we had to use a grinder to get the tire off the rim.
Grown to the rim.
Because it had grown, it had corroded to the rim so badly.
Was it like an alloy wheel or one of the chrome wheels?
The chrome ones.
One of the chrome ones?
One of the chrome metal ones.
Oh, so
where the rust gotten in there and then it had all eaten itself together. And it just, you have to take a grinder.
Those are always a mess, aren't they?
Yeah.
So let's back up just well, maybe not back up, but just for those of you that are listening, and we talked on last week's show about custom motorcycles, and we're talking about kind of how the reality shows distort reality. But let's, Don, walk through the process. If somebody wanted a custom motorcycle, what does that process look like? I mean, when somebody shows up to you and says, I want a custom bike, and then in reality, what are we looking at for like full timeline?
Okay. If they have a motorcycle that they're starting with and they want a custom motorcycle built out of this motorcycle, you have to pretty well expect that the motorcycle is going to be completely torn down and then completely built again at least 6 times. It's going to be at least 6 times. And it's because of all the different aspects that you're modifying and you're changing on it. And then after you get all those done, just like you're changing out the exhaust, okay? So we figure out the exhaust you want on it, which could take a little bit of time right there.
If they offer an exhaust system.
Yes, if they offer an exhaust system.
You don't have to make the exhaust system.
I make a lot of exhaust systems in-house.
Yeah, both of us, I think, do.
Because there's a lot of older bikes that they don't have exhaust systems for. And so you have to make the exhaust system, and then after you get made the exhaust system, you're going to have to figure out how you're mounting it to the bike, whether the motor's engine or whether the engine is rubber mounted or solid mounted, and then that's going to depict how you do your mounts. So that right there could take a lot of time. If you want to move the battery, I get a lot of guys that want to move the batteries. They like the whole cafe racer sleek look where you can look through the bike.
Sure.
So we're going to have to move the battery. So once we move the battery, we're going to have to figure out where we want it. And then after we get it moved to that point and we get the wiring all changed, you have to make your mounts. You're going to tear the bike down to make your mounts because you have to get rid of all that stuff before you can weld on it, because you can't weld on the bike with all that stuff on it because you'll burn it up. So you have to remove everything. You have to make that, get that welded up, and then you're going to have to run your wiring back through it. And then after you get that done, now you're going to have to remove all the tabs from all the original stuff. And so after you get that stuff done, well, then you're going to go on to another part of the bike, depending on what you're doing with the gas tank or what you're going to do with the front forks or what you're going to do with the gauges. You're going to have to tear that all stuff apart and get it fixed. And then once you get all of those different teardowns and different builds put together and you get it all done, now you have to completely tear the entire bike down so that you can finish the frame the way the frame needs to be finished, because you're not going to want to just go through there with a piece of cardboard and stick it behind something and then spray paint it with a rattle can.
Yeah, if we're going to powder coat it, or
yeah, we're going to powder coat it. We're going to give it a nice paint job, and then that doesn't nearly then you have to start taking into account bodywork time. And you've been in a body shop, you know that sometimes bodywork time takes a long time.
Yes, it does. Compressing the time like they do, and I understand, again, fitting it into a 1-hour TV show so you can have a different car, different bike per show, but I mean, the misconceptions that get put out from this, it's crazy that it happens like this.
It does happen. The only one that I have noticed that actually addresses that was, I don't know, I have a lot of people that don't like them and a lot of people that do like them, but Phantom Works, the television show Phantom Works.
Yeah.
Because I've seen that a couple of times, and when, they usually only do one show, or they do one car per show, but then a lot of times they'll go in and they'll talk to the owner about it, and he'll have the bill. There's been a couple of cars that he did that the hours were like 620. Yeah. 620 hours. And if and that's what he does. Sometimes they're in the 180 hours, sometimes they're in the 400 hours depending, but I got one of the cars that they did was up to 620 some hours. And that's fine and all if you've got a crew of 40 people working on the vehicle. Right. But if you're a smaller shop and you've got one guy working on it here and one guy working on it here, and an 80 to 120 hour build takes time, and that doesn't include a lot of the time loss parts of the build that you don't really think about, and that like waiting on parts is a simple time loss thing. Getting prepped to work on it, as far as like your tools and the shop itself and making sure the shop's clean. You have a lot of other things where the shop loses time. People are upset about how much shop time costs because they're like, well, there's no reason that shop time should be $72 an hour. But yeah, because we're not getting paid $72 an hour when your car gets there until your car leaves. Right. We're getting paid $72 an hour when we're working on your car. And that does not include all the equipment, even just like the rent or the utilities of the shop. That has to cover those other things, like keeping the shop clean and keeping stuff on the shelves and keeping those kinds of things done. It's just it's really crazy how fast they show some of these bikes being built or these cars being built, and all the drama they filled. And that's just it. They're getting their credits, or they're getting. They're after the drama and they're after the speed, so that it's constantly moving, because our society is in the want it now society. Yeah,
we are definitely a fast food society.
A lot of people don't realize the amount of time and effort it takes to actually source these parts. Let's just choose engine work,
right?
And we're going to talk about buying pistons, and we're going to talk about buying camshafts, and we're going to talk about buying valves and valve springs. The amount of time it takes to sit down and to call, if it's a Harley Davidson, you were mentioning a Sportster earlier. Mm-hmm. So if you talk to Andrews, and so you're going to buy those cams, and maybe we need to talk to Kibblewhite to buy some valves or some valve guides. There's how much time do you think it takes in non-billable hours that you spend on the phone talking to technicians and ordering parts and looking up parts from whoever you're a dealer for?
I would say that I probably average 4 hours a day.
Yeah, I would say I do at least 4 hours a day.
It's at least 4 hours a day.
And that's 4 non-billable hours.
Yes, 4 non-billable hours a day. And that's not... And I would average that because some days I get lucky and I'm only on the phone shortly. But other days, there's been days where I've went into work thinking, oh, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to get this done, and I'm going to get this done. And then I don't even bill 1 hour, not even 1 hour, because my entire day is spent on the phone. Like, just like that Sportster, when we were talking about that Sportster, when we decided on the pistons we were going to use on that Sportster, it took 4 days of figuring out what piston, the manufacturer, the compression ratio, the size. It took 4 days just to figure out that piston. And then we get the piston because it's supposed to work.
Yeah, but it doesn't. It doesn't work with the valves that you get. It doesn't work with the cams that you get. There's not the proper valve clearance.
Yes.
And so we have to go in and we have to change that, right?
Yeah. That was part of that decision. Part of that 4-day decision was this is the piston for us.
And they don't cover that on reality shows unless they make it look like that they fixed it we fixed it over the commercial break.
Yeah.
And so you have customers that come in and say, well, they fixed it in a commercial break. So what seems to be your holdup?
Yeah, exactly.
So do you get a lot of, especially with the generation now, and you're seeing younger people get involved in custom motorcycles and that sort of thing? I mean, how is that affecting your business?
It's not bad. The good thing about my business is we do a lot of cafe racers and a lot of older Japanese and older European bikes. So there's really not a lot of places in town to go.
Yeah.
If you're not driving a Harley, if you're driving a Harley Davidson, you can turn any corner and you find a shop. But with what we do, it's a little bit older. The bad thing about what we do is this whole institution on the internet about, these garage builds and everything means that what normally happens is a guy buys the motorcycle. He decides, I'm going to make a cafe racer. I saw it on the internet. And he goes and he starts building a cafe racer, and then 6 months after he started, he realizes I'm in over my head, and then he brings it to me as this big jumbled mess.
Right.
And then is upset about the cost it takes to fix his
And then
mess.
he's upset about the
both
cost
of
that
us
it
have
takes.
been in that situation many times.
Yeah.
I get that often. I had my girlfriend, she works at a bank, and one of the security guards was talking about a CB 550 that one of his friends has, and they sold the bike. They sold the bike because the wiring harness was bad on it, and they took it to the Honda dealership, and the Honda said, "Oh, you can't rewire those." And they just took that as gospel. So they just sold the bike. And I'm like, no, you can and then you get this misconception. Well, you can't do that. And yeah, you can do just about everything. It's just that there's a lot of misconception out there, and there's a lot of problems with how easy everybody seems to think it is, because they've seen it on the internet, they've seen it on TV, so this is easy until they start doing it. And then once they start doing it, they realize this isn't easy. And then they bring it to me, and now they're upset about how much money they're spending to fix it.
Well, the one thing that we run into a lot, I think you run into and I run into also, is the fact that they may have taken something several different places. Okay?
Yes.
And
I run into that a lot.
It has progressively gone downhill every time it's gone somewhere else.
Yes.
So they've spent money in other places, and they come to you, okay, and you fix their problem. Then it's like you should cut them slack, or you should do your job for less because they've already spent their money elsewhere making other poor decisions.
And that happens a lot. And I feel for these people. And I actually do. There's been quite a few jobs where I've given them a discount. Not a crazy discount, but I've given them a discount just because I felt bad. Because, it's some younger guy. He's getting into motorcycles. He's all happy and excited about it. And then the next thing you know, he's just gotten screwed over and screwed over and screwed over and screwed over and screwed over until his bike is just this enormous mess.
Yes.
And then we have to fix it. And he's not upset at us. He's upset at himself. I had a customer, which luckily he was a great guy. He had a CB 350. And he bought it from a builder in Pennsylvania. And this guy was he's like, man, I did my research. This thing is great. This thing is awesome. He bought it. He had some problems with it. He took it to a motorcycle shop in Lawton. He's from Lawton. Took it to a motorcycle shop in Lawton. And then he said he picked it up from them. And when he started driving it, he got it into third gear, and that was it. It was done. He's like, I can't get it out of third gear. Can't get it in, can't get it out of third gear, going up or going down or anything. He brought it to my shop, and I found out that the shop he took it to was replacing a seal in it and replacing a kicker shaft in it, which you have to break the cases. They had put his shift drum 180 degrees out. So that was messed up. So when he had it with me, we fixed some other problems. His head gasket was leaking. His head gasket was leaking because a shop had put his exhaust on the bike, a supposedly competent builder shop, and they had bolted his exhaust to his swing arm. So his exhaust was sitting there cranking on the head anytime he drove it. And I'm like, well, yeah, you're going to leak a head gasket because you've got this huge lever
cranking. We're trying to pry the cylinder head off of it.
Yeah. And so we fixed that, and then he decided he wanted to do some other work. So in the process of doing the other work, he wanted to clean up the frame and stuff. We were cleaning up some tabs off the frame, and I thought this kind of looked funny, so I dug into it, and they had reinforced the frame of a motorcycle with Bondo.
All right.
That sounds not quite so safe.
Yeah. And I'm like, holy cow, and they had used for the rear frame loop, they had used galvanized tubing from a fence, like galvanized fence tubing as the frame tube on this motorcycle.
Well, they needed some material, and they were tearing down a fence. So.
Yeah. It was incredible. It was
there.
And I'm like, and this is supposedly coming from
a reputable builder.
A builder.
Wow. It's amazing that there are people out there that are doing business like that, for one thing, but I mean, we're talking about some real safety issues on a motorcycle.
Yeah, I was like, this thing could collapse going around the corner because it was the cross member in the frame where the rear suspension bolted up.
Well, you see a lot with rat rods where in the shows they're going through like a metal salvage yard, and they come up with some kind of wrought iron this, or they come up with some kind of rusty deal there, and then they put it in, and it's supposed to be cool. And I don't understand where the cool comes from with coming up with a lot of literal scrap iron stuff.
Yeah.
To put on it.
Well, everybody's got their own thing, what they think is cool and interesting, or and there's a way of looking at that where that's the way that they build hot rods in the 50s, using whatever they could and that sort of thing. And I think rat rods are cool, but I mean we're still talking about 4 wheels touching the ground and not just 2. And we're hopefully if you're building a rat rod, that you're not using those types of parts in a structural integrity portion of the car.
Right.
Yeah. If it's an accessory, if it's an accent, then, whatever is your flavor.
If you're going to use a fender off of an old freaking Ford that's all rusted up and you want to stick it on there, put it on a fender on your bike, hey.
That's fine.
Yeah, it might fall off driving down the road,
right.
but if it does fall off, it's behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, but when they try and use it as a integral part of the chassis in and of itself, that's out there.
Yeah, and I felt so sorry for this guy, and I get those guys all the time where he's done his homework, he's like, this is the thing for me. He buys it, and then you find out that that was 3 shops. He bought it from the guy in Pennsylvania. He got it here, and then he took it to another shop, and then they messed it up, and then he brought it to me. And I have no idea how much money he's got invested in it now.
Yeah, well, sometimes you unfortunately get into those money pits, and and I think that just goes to you want to do your research when you are looking for a shop or a builder or a customizer. You want to talk to people who have been there before. You want to check out the quality of their work, and you want to do your homework and know what you're getting yourself into, not only because it's a financial investment, but it's also a safety investment. You're putting your life in their hands, especially if you're messing with anything that involves the structure or the chassis or anything like that with the way the motorcycle rides and handles. There's a lot that can go wrong in those situations, especially if you have people that are, shoring up a chassis with Bondo or fence parts.
What about suspension-wise? What kind of, I myself have seen a lot of homie boy stuff done with forks and with shocks.
And you see that stuff all the time. Like, I have seen a couple of the dudes that did the whole shimming with a beer can.
What is up with that, and where did that come from? So the sport bikes, they're going to lower the sport bikes, okay? And the tubes are tapered.
Tubes are almost always tapered on the sport bikes, the inverted forks.
Yeah, and so they want to push the forks up through the triple clamp so the bike sits lower because everybody wants to slam them on the ground. Well, the problem is that they've hourglassed these fork tubes, right? The actual, the body, the inverted bodies.
The inverted bodies are almost always.
Yeah. So then tell us what you found.
I actually, there's been a couple where I found where they've just used, I remember it being, if I remember right, it was a Pabst Blue Ribbon on one side.
So they didn't drink the good stuff.
Well, but that's the hipster beer.
Yeah,
okay.
and a Sprite.
A Sprite can.
Sprite can
was
on the
it
other
the chaser?
Side. And they'll just take them and they'll cut them up so they got these big strips, and then they'll fold them over to get as much thickness as they need, and then they'll just wrap that around there, and then they'll tighten it up. And they'll just use that as a shim. And I'm like, that's the front end on your motorcycle. I'm like, you got 2 wheels. And the worst thing is they're doing these on sport bikes. Yeah. A bike that
160 mile an hour motorcycle.
A bike that could legitimately run 160 miles an hour.
And that if they're shoring up their suspension with a beer can, they're actually going out and trying to run at 160 miles an hour down the highway.
Well, sure. Absolutely.
And I don't know how many listeners have actually ran at those kinds of speeds. I've ran at those kinds of speeds. And when you get to those kinds of speeds, the littlest bumps feel like potholes.
Yes, they do.
Yeah, you can upset a motorcycle very easily.
They will rattle your teeth sometimes if you get on the wrong stretch of road.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing to me. I've seen them where I had a motorcycle come in that had no bearings. No bearings in the neck.
None? No steering head bearings at all?
No steering head bearings at all.
How did it turn?
Well, that's what they had taken 2 plates of steel from. I have no idea what they were from. I don't know what they're from. And they just stuck them in there where the bearings go. And it turned, But I noticed it when I came in, because I came in the shop and I turned it and I thought it felt funky. But when I pressed on the front brake, the entire front suspension went kunk and moved about 2 inches in. And then when you released it, it went kunk.
So the frame and the forks moved independent of each other in the steering head stem itself.
Yeah.
Like the steering bearings were loose.
Right.
Only it had no bearings.
It had no bearings. So I'm like, well, we need to take a look at these bearings. And I pulled it apart. I'm like, there's no bearings in this thing. None. I had a guy not too long ago who brought in his ZX7, and he wanted me to look at the chain because he thought the chain was going bad. So I looked at the chain. I grabbed a hold of his. When I went to look at the chain, I just leaned down and touched his rear sprocket, and his rear sprocket rotated about 3/4 of an inch to an inch without the tire rotating. Somebody had put the bike together without the cush drives in the bike.
So for all of our listeners that may not know what that is, there is a carrier in the rear wheel of a motorcycle, okay? And there are these rubber inserts that are a damper for the rear sprocket.
For the vibrate is supposed to help with the vibration and the acceleration and things of that nature.
And without that, you have huge amounts of play.
Massive.
Through acceleration and I bet that was horrendous on decel when you shut the throttle off.
When you shut the throttle off, it had to just like lurch and like just jerk you all over the place. But yeah, you could just sit there and you could just go clunk, clunk, back and forth. And I'm like, there's no cush drives in this at all.
So how many customers have you had be upset because either they themselves tried to do something that they've seen on YouTube or a blog or something, or a buddy down the street has done to it, and then they try and justify, well, I saw it on the web, so it has to be true. You can't. This can't be right. What you want to do can't be right because it's not what they say to do on the web.
Yeah, that happens quite often. I don't know how many times I've had like. As far as front suspension, I'm not even sure. I wouldn't even want to guesstimate, but I don't know how many people thought, well, instead of buying new springs for my front forks, I'll just take a piece of PVC pipe, cut it, and then put it in there, and then that'll give me my preload.
I tell you what, when you buy an actual spring kit, a lot of times, you would know as well as I do that they may send a piece of very thick wall PVC pipe for very small amounts of preload.
Yes.
But that is for a given spring kit for this motorcycle.
Correct.
It's not trying to take a set of tired, sacked out springs and let's pack it full of water pipe to make the bike have a ride height again.
No, and then on top of that, they'll buy some PVC pipe at like Home Depot or Lowe's or someplace that's not thick walled, and they're putting it in there, and it's mushrooming out, and then they're making it 6 inches long. It's
no part of that is good.
No.
So in the scheme of things, although the media has brought in a lot of light to our industry in a positive manner, it is also sort of, with the reality stuff, has sort of distorted what the actual reality and time frame is on what needs to be done.
Yeah, it has distorted it badly.
Okay, so if somebody is looking to have work done on their motorcycle, whether it be full custom or they just need to take care of some of the issues that you guys have talked about, what do you think is the best way to research that? Because we've talked about some of the blogs and the message boards, and you can get misinformation in a variety of places. But what would be the process that somebody would need to go through if they have a bike and they need to get some work done?
Well, I would try to find people at local places that have had their bike. Find a bike you like. That's the best way. Find a bike you like, and then find out where they get their work done and how happy they are with their mechanic.
And if it's a particular product, go to that manufacturer's website, call that manufacturer,
and find out
the information behind it. Find out who their dealers are.
Yeah, who they know, who they recommend locally to work on your stuff.
Okay, great. Well, Don Muma, thanks for taking time out to join us on the Powersports Podcast. Don's shop is Motive Cycle Works in Edmond, Oklahoma. And how can people find you, Don?
We're on the internet as Motive Cycle Works. We're on Instagram as Motive Cycle Works. We're on Facebook as Motive Cycle Works. And then we are located just north of the Wilshire Gun Range, off of Wilshire and Classen.
Okay. Very good. So, and if you're not from Oklahoma City, I'm sure Don will do work for out-of-towners too. So
I
just
work
come
on
on,
everybody's bike.
come on to the city, check out his website, Motorcycle Works, and Google it if you need to, and do whatever you need to do. Don, thanks for coming in. Some great information from you and Eric today, and hopefully that you listening out there, you've learned a little bit of something, and at least learned that reality TV is not quite real, and there are good and bad ways to fix your motorcycle. We appreciate you listening to the Powersports Podcast. Don't forget you can find us at oklahomatalking.co. That's the Oklahoma Talking Company. You can also like our page on Facebook. Just search Powersports Podcast. That's facebook.com/Powersports-Podcast. You can find us on Twitter at Powersports Talk on Twitter. We are also on Instagram as Powersports Podcast. And we are happy to announce that we are now available not only on iTunes and the Oklahoma Talking Company, but we are now available on Stitcher Radio also. And so if you have the Stitcher app on your smartphone, you can find us. It may look a little weird on there, but just search for Powersports Podcast. But we have some other Oklahoma Talking Company content that comes up there as well. But you can listen to all of the Powersports podcasts on Stitcher Radio. So go check it out. And we once again appreciate you listening. We are out of here.